I know this looks absolutely ridiculous for an adult to be transporting an RC car, especially this size, on the back of a bicycle. The reason I have this here is I'm testing this out. For those of you following my Instagram, this bicycle is converted to electric, and I had ridden this back in 2011. Battery broke and I got a new one and started riding. So just testing this out, and we're doing kind of a new spot here for talking about the 903. So this is a 12 scale car, and I do not recommend budget cars generally by nature of this scale for most people. And the reason why is the electronics inside a budget car of this size is going to be the same electronics or very similar to ones that are smaller. So by nature, you're carrying a heavier load with the same electronics. So the performance is going to suffer drastically. So who is this car for? As usual, we're going to start our YouTube videos with the conclusion first. That way, if you find that's not relevant to you, you can skip this video and move on with your life. I'm not here to waste your time. So this is 903, and this is a 12 scale car. For beginners, I would recommend a 16 scale car or an 18 scale car. The only reason you would buy a 12 scale car is just for the size, because you think it's impressive or you just like having a larger vehicle. But do understand the sacrifices you're making is that, one, it's harder to lug around. This thing does not fit in this drawstring bag. This is a bag that I got from Ross for like $10, $15, and that does not fit in there, especially with transmitter and batteries. Two 18 scale cars will fit in here, or one 16 scale and one 18 scale. But a 12 scale will not fit. A lot of us are gonna be driving cars or bringing RC cars in our real car to wherever we're driving it around, or you may be carrying it down the block to a park of some sort. But to have something of this size is a little cumbersome, and the performance of it, as I said, is a downfall. It's very underwhelming. If you have other RC cars, you're not going to want to get this. So why are we talking about this at all? Well, the other day I brought this to my son's soccer game, and an 8-year-old saw me driving it and she wanted to test it out, and she had never driven an RC car before. So I handed her the transmitter and showed her how it worked, and she had a blast with it, and she thought it was fast, and she loved it, and she wishes she had one. And right now, Haiboxing on their Facebook group is offering a deal for members exclusively for under $50. So it's $47 shipped through Amazon. So you're gonna get it in a couple days if you're in the United States, and it is a very good deal. But again, the audience for this is gonna be people who are brand new to RC cars and don't know if you're even gonna commit to it. And for adults, it's still kind of overwhelming, and if you don't know, underwhelming. And as an adult, if you don't know if you want to get into it, this isn't going to be exciting enough for you to really be falling into the hobby. Okay, so this is going to be number one for kids probably 10 and under who have never driven an RC car before, or number two is going to be for someone who is very familiar with RC cars but also understands that the powertrain in this, the electronics, is very underwhelming, and they plan to upgrade this immediately out of the box, because this goes no faster than, I would say, 18 miles an hour. What's considered fast to the public, to normal people out there, is going to be 28 miles an hour-ish. When you get under 20 miles an hour, it's mostly slow to majority of the public. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about who this is for in a real-world scenario. On my YouTube channel, I've talked about some Haiboxing cars that are good for a father, a parent, and their child to share if you're not sure you want a car. This is not that car, because the parent is not going to be excited by this at all. And so it's going to be more for the kids. So real scenario is, say you're bringing one of your two kids to a soccer game or a practice, and you need to bring the other kid and they have nothing to do, and you don't want them on their iPad or playing with the phone or bothering you, and they're just not really into the game. Then they're going to need something else to do, and so maybe you bring an RC car and they can play with that on the side. And so in that kind of scenario, you're not going to have a lot of space, and for younger kids, you're not going to want them too far away from you as a parent, just to keep an eye on them for safety. So you're not necessarily going to want a car that is too fast. And so this fits that scenario where it's less than 20 miles an hour, probably 18 miles an hour, and it's a big enough size where a younger kid would be impressed with it, and they're not going to go out of control. Okay, before you ask me, because you're thinking about it, if I don't recommend this 903 for beginners generally, then what car do I recommend? Haiboxing makes a 16 scale car and 18 scale car, which are both very, very good. With metal drivetrain, comes with 2 batteries, LiPo batteries, they have oil-filled shocks, and they're very durable, and just those sizes in general are very durable, and they're very high performing. And they're both under $120. One of them is even under $90 right now on eBay. So those cars I'm pointed up here on the screen is going to be the Haiboxing 16889A Pro. Okay, 16889A Pro. I know that's a mouthful, but as the 16 scale car, it's been proven over the years, past couple years, and recently, like earlier this year, they produced one that is the professional model. That's why it's called the Pro, and it has basically all the upgrades, but it is stock out of the box with everything in it that you would need. And the next car is an 18 scale car, so it's a little bit smaller, and it's called the 18859A. Okay, make sure you get the A. Okay, 18859A, and that is the metal drivetrain version. And again, it's brushed, oil-filled shocks. It performs very, very well. Better than the 903 we're going to look at, but I just want to throw that out there before we look at the 903. If you're still with me, we're going to go over the details in the 903. Let's go over pricing again in detail. On Amazon, as of right now, it is $110 with a 30% off coupon. Do not be fooled by the $110. Do not buy this for $110. It is not worth $110. So $77 plus tax after the discount. Or if you join the Haiboxing Facebook group, of which I am an administrator, and I will approve you once you try to join and answer the 2 questions. And for that, you can get for under $50 shipped to you in a matter of a couple days, depending on what Amazon normally ships to you at. And in most cases in the US, that is going to be just a couple days. And so here we are with the Vanguard, and I'm going to go ahead and open this up so you can kind of take a look at what it looks like. So normal Lexan body, it's not any more or less durable than what you would think. Nothing special about that. Over here, what's interesting and unusual is the ratio of the width of this chassis versus the width of the tires. So this is very, very wide for such a narrow chassis, and for that, it's very, very stable. It is very, very stable. The power of it also, it's not going to perform wheelies. That's why there's no wheelie bar, and generally it's not going to flip over, so it can be controlled fairly easily. And the reason why I suspect that they have a narrow chassis too is to reduce weight. As I mentioned earlier, the weight to power ratio for this size car that's a budget vehicle with budget electronics is not gonna lend itself to be a high performing car. So they do need to make this as lightweight as possible, and do that, I'm assuming one of the ways is to narrow down the chassis and just not weigh it down as much as they absolutely need to. So this has a heatsink, does not have a fan. What's interesting about this Haiboxing vehicle, which we have not seen in their other offerings, is that it has an extra plastic mounting bracket that goes over the motor, which I suspect makes it so that dirt and stuff doesn't get into it, which is great, because one of their more recent offerings had these exposed holes, and if you're driving in dirt and dust, it gets inside the motor and can seize it. So this looks like it's protecting that, not just for durability for physical crashes and things like that, but so that dust doesn't get in there. So that's nice to see. It doesn't have a fan because it's not going to need one, because it's not, again, it's not as powerful as other cars where you would need that. So these are the oil-filled shocks. It is actually very good suspension, especially the front. The front feels a little bit stiffer than the back, as you would expect, because as cars come to sharp turns or is braking, then it's going to kind of nosedive, so it does need to have a little bit more resistance in the shocks up front. It does include the lights, as Haiboxing is known for, and for this one it's already pre-installed, so you don't need to install those yourself. And it looks like this one popped out, so you're just gonna push that back in there and then it'll look like this guy. And so when the battery is low, you'll see the lights blink, so that's a good visual indicator of when it's time to bring the car back. If you do get this car for the sale, this is an amazing deal as far as the chassis quality. So these are CVDs. This is part of the suspension, and they're metal. generally for budget cars, especially anything under $50, is not going to be metal. It's going to be plastic. And these are fairly beefy for its size. I mean, they're not substantially beefy, but it's a good size, impressive size, I'd say, for this size vehicle. So for those of you who are a little bit more seasoned or who have researched on YouTube a lot, you'll notice that this has a 3-wire servo. Okay. The brown, red, and yellow wire is a 3-wire servo. So this is standard for brushless vehicles. So that means if you're going to change to a new transmitter, that generally will come with a small little box, which is the receiver that has the antenna attached to it. You can plug that servo directly into that receiver and therefore not have to change out the servo. You would normally think that that's like the usual case, but that's not really true. For most budget cars, especially the ones earlier on, have 5 wires coming out of this, which means it's not compatible with your receiver, and you would have to change out your motor, your ESC, your receiver, and your servo, basically all the electronics. So you can save yourself by not changing out the servo because they have a 3-wire servo. But generally, as a general rule, I would not recommend modifying Haiboxing or budget cars in general. They are made to run as they are, and their limitations are as they are. If you're really into wrenching and working on stuff and less excited about driving and you really like tinkering, then by all means go for it. I'm not discouraging you. But if you are looking for a car that's better performing or stronger, seriously, just get another car. And that is not saying anything bad about Haiboxing. That's in general, even with the Arma cars that are $250, $300, $400, $600 plus. If you're buying a base model and upgrading it to be like the higher end ones, you're gonna end up spending more and it's not gonna perform as well, but you will have the ability to customize and you'll be able to make it your own and learn about it. And if that's something you'd like to do, by all means go for it. But for most people, modifying this is not gonna be a route that you would take. As a budget car, we would suspect that does not have metal drivetrain. And I know that because even the center drive shaft, which is this thing here connecting the front wheels to the back wheels, is plastic. You're not gonna have a plastic drivetrain with metal gearing and metal diffs and things like that. So it's gonna be plastic, which is totally fine, because for this, again, this limit of power, you're not gonna need metal, and metal is louder and heavier. And so when you're running a budget car that's fairly slow, you're not gonna prefer metal. But again, if you're gonna be one of those seasoned guys who wants to hack this and really get into it and start modifying, do realize that does not come with a metal drivetrain. And so if you're gonna run this on higher voltage, it's likely not going to be able to handle it well. And aftermarket installation of metal parts on these cars I have not had good experience with. So if you're gonna want to get a metal drivetrain car, then I would highly, highly advise that you just do that rather than modifying something like this. Normally I do get very excited about these transmitters that have speed adjustments, especially when it's a dial rather than a switch. That way you can turn it as slow or as fast as you want. But because of the speed of this car being underwhelming and not very fast, it's kind of a joke because you're not really going to turn this down past max ever. So for this application, the speed dial is not really a feature. One thing about the transmitter, just for sizing for my adult hand of someone who's 5'7", it's quite a bit of a reach to be able to drive one-handed. So it's not something that most beginners or anyone really does, but it's something I like to talk about because I do that a lot as I'm holding other stuff with my right hand or holding my kid's hand or their water bottle or their bag, whatever, and we're going somewhere, I would be driving with one hand. Another thing about the size is that generally to go over grass, I would not recommend anything less than 1/10 scale. And this is no exception. This 1/12 scale, because of the power to weight ratio is not as good, is not going to perform on grass nearly as well as even its younger brothers, the 16 scale and 18 scale I talked about earlier. So this is not something you're going to want to run on grass primarily. It does have the clearance to manage it, but it's not something that's going to perform well on grass. turf or maybe very short grass, but tall grass and just regular height grass, I would not buy this car with the idea of driving it in grass as primary terrain. If you do, you're going to be very, very disappointed. So this, I would say, even though it's a monster truck, I would say is mostly for dirt or for turf or for pavement like this. All right, so I'm not expecting this to do very well on hills or grass, being a 2S brushed car, but we're gonna go and test that. So this max throttle here, it's not quite making it through the deep grass, even with some momentum. Nope. Let's see how far this thing goes before we lose reception. So the steering is a little sensitive. I am using just one hand here. All right, so that appears to be the range. Yeah, so I'm using throttle. The car is not moving. So the range isn't exceptional. For this size car, you'd probably want it to be, you probably want the range a little bit further just so that you're able to, since you're able to see it, you'd want it further. For cars that are 18 scale or 16 scale, it makes sense that it doesn't go that far because you're not going to see it that far. Struggling, it barely made that. Oh, there we go. So when we have dirt and we have low sort of terrain, then it works okay. But when we have long grass, that's just not gonna happen. Servo's not able to turn all the way right just because it's getting stuck here on that rock. So the servo's not going to be super strong. Yeah. There we go, we got out. So when I was driving this car at a park, I let one of my kids' classmates play with it. And she has never run an RC car before. She's about 8 years old, and she considered this quick, fast, so she's probably not played with a whole lot of, oops, RC cars in the past. So again, this car most likely goes under 18 miles per hour. It's not even really worth measuring because it's nothing too impressive. Little struggle, let's see. You can kind of hear the motor whining. Let's try that again. So we are on the stock lithium-ion battery. It's about probably 90% throttle.